I wasn't looking for trouble when I opened the email that night. Truth be told, I was just trying to make rent. Freelance reporting doesn't exactly pay the bills, not when you're chasing stories nobody wants to believe. But there it was, an anonymous tip sitting in my inbox like a ticking time bomb. The subject line read, "They walk among us." Cryptic, sure, but vague enough to pique my curiosity. The message itself was worse, short, unsettling, and devoid of any pleasantries. It claimed that a series of disappearances in New Orleans, all unsolved, were connected to something ancient and malevolent. No names, no details, just one chilling sentence: follow the blood. And then, as if the sender knew I'd hesitate, they added, "You'll find what you're looking for if you survive." I should have deleted it right then and there. Minneapolis is cold enough without adding chills to your spine. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially for someone like me. I've spent years chasing shadows, urban legends, cryptic murders, things that go bump in the night, and every time I think I've found something real, it slips through my fingers like smoke. Still, New Orleans had a pull I couldn't ignore. It's a city steeped in mystery, where history whispers through cobblestone streets and the air hangs heavy with secrets. Vampires? Sure, it sounded ridiculous. But if there's one thing I've learned in this business, it's that the truth often hides in the absurd. The flight was cheap, too cheap, and as I sat crammed between two snoring passengers, I wondered if this was another wild goose chase. But something about that email gnawed at me. It wasn't just the words, it was the feeling they left behind, like someone had reached through the screen and grabbed hold of my gut. When I landed in New Orleans, the city greeted me with its usual charm, a cacophony of jazz spilling from dimly lit bars, and the scent of fried food mingling with damp air. But beneath the revelry was an unease I couldn't shake. Maybe it was the shadows that seemed darker than they should have been, or the way people glanced over their shoulders as they walked alone at night. I checked into a dingy motel on the edge of town, the kind where you pay extra for clean sheets, and started digging into local news reports. Missing persons cases were everywhere. Young women vanishing after nights out on Bourbon Street, tourists disappearing without a trace, even locals who should have known better than to wander alone after dark. The police chalked it up to crime or accidents. New Orleans is no stranger to tragedy, but there was a pattern they weren't seeing. Or maybe they didn't want to see it. Every victim had been found near landmarks tied to folklore. Cemeteries with crumbling mausoleums, voodoo shops with faded signs, even an abandoned plantation house rumored to be cursed. And then there were the bodies, or what was left of them. The reports were sparse but consistent. Pale skin, drained of blood, and puncture wounds that defied explanation. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. Someone, or something, was hunting these people. That's when I found myself staring at my laptop screen long after midnight, wondering what kind of fool chases vampires in a city famous for its ghosts. But fools make great reporters, or so I tell myself, and by morning, I was ready to follow the blood. New Orleans greeted me like an old friend with a dark secret, warm, inviting, but with an edge that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The air was thick with humidity, clinging to my skin like a second layer. It smelled of damp earth, fried food, and something faintly metallic that I couldn't place. The city was alive, but not in the way most cities are. Here, life felt precarious, as though it teetered on the edge of something unseen. The streets were a maze of cobblestones and shadows, illuminated by flickering gas lamps that seemed to struggle against the encroaching darkness. Jazz spilled out of every open door, a chaotic symphony of brass and strings that should have been comforting but wasn't. Even the music felt haunted, like it carried secrets too heavy to share. I started my investigation at a crime scene, a narrow alley tucked behind a bar in the French Quarter. The police tape fluttered weakly in the breeze, and the smell of bleach hung in the air where someone had tried and failed to scrub away the horror. The young woman had been found here 2 nights ago, her body drained of blood. The official report said probable overdose, but I wasn't buying it. Overdoses don't leave puncture wounds on your neck. The bartender who found her was still shaken when I spoke to him. His hands trembled as he wiped down glasses that didn't need cleaning. "She was just there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought she was passed out at first, but then I saw her eyes. He paused, staring into nothing for a moment before adding, they were wide open, like she'd seen something she couldn't unsee. I asked him if he'd noticed anything unusual before her death, strange people hanging around or odd behavior, but he shook his head. Not really, he said, then hesitated. Well, there was this guy. He described him as pale, well-dressed, and unnervingly quiet, a man who seemed to blend into the shadows even when he stood in plain sight. From there, I followed whispers and rumors through the French Quarter like breadcrumbs. Locals spoke in hushed tones about the coterie, an alleged secret society of vampires who had lived among them for centuries. Most dismissed it as urban legend, stories to scare tourists or sell ghost tours, but there was always a flicker of fear behind their laughter. One name kept coming up: Jacques Saint-Germain. According to legend, he arrived in New Orleans in 1902, claiming to be a descendant of the infamous Count of Saint-Germain, a man rumored to have lived for centuries without aging. Jacques was known for his extravagant parties and peculiar habits. He never ate in public and only drank wine, though some claimed his wine bottles were filled with blood instead of Bordeaux. The story took a darker turn when a woman allegedly leapt from his second-story balcony, screaming that he had attacked her and tried to drink her blood. When police searched his home, they found bloodstains and wine bottles filled with something far more sinister than Merlot. Jacques vanished that night, leaving behind only questions and unease. I wasn't just chasing Jacques Saint-Germain. I was following a trail of breadcrumbs that led me deeper into the heart of New Orleans' supernatural underworld. Every interview, every clue seemed to circle back to the coterie, this shadowy group that seemed to pull the strings from behind the scenes. And then there were the watchers. At first I thought I was imagining things, the feeling of being followed or stared at, but soon enough I started catching glimpses. Shadowy figures lingering just out of sight or disappearing around corners before I could get a good look. New Orleans wasn't just eerie. It was suffocating, like something heavy was pressing down on me from all sides. Whatever was happening here wasn't random or coincidental. It was deliberate and ancient, and I was walking straight into its jaws. I found myself drawn to the tale of John and Wayne Carter, two brothers from the 1930s who were arrested after police discovered their apartment was essentially a bloodletting chamber. 4 victims were found tied up inside, drained but alive, barely. The brothers were executed for their crimes, but their bodies vanished from their tombs shortly after burial. Some say they escaped. Others believe they were never truly human to begin with. As I pieced these stories together, I began to notice patterns, threads connecting legends across decades and centuries. Every tale seemed to circle back to certain locations. St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, where shadows seemed to move even when no one walked among the tombs. An abandoned plantation house on the outskirts of town where locals swore they heard screams late at night, and Royal Street, where Jacques Saint-Germain's former residence still stood like a silent witness to its own dark history. Then, there was the Casket Girls. According to local lore, these young women arrived from France in the 18th century with trunks, or caskets, that were said to contain vampires instead of belongings. Their chests were stored in the attic of the Ursuline convent, which was later sealed shut with nails blessed by priests. To this day, no one is allowed inside that attic. I visited the convent one afternoon under the guise of researching colonial history. The tour guide was cheerful enough until I asked about the attic. Her smile faltered for just a moment before she quickly changed the subject. By now, I could feel eyes on me wherever I went, on Bourbon Street, in quiet cafes, even in my motel room late at night when I swore I heard footsteps outside my door. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia. After all, New Orleans has a way of making you feel like you're never truly alone. But then came the notes, slips of paper left under my door or tucked into my jacket pocket when I wasn't looking. Each one contained only 3 words: "Stop digging now." I didn't stop. Instead, I found myself drawn deeper into this web of shadows and whispers until it felt like there was no way out but forward. Every lead brought me closer to something I couldn't quite name, a presence that seemed to pulse beneath the surface of this city like an open wound. And then came the night when everything changed. I was sitting in my motel room going over my notes when my phone buzzed with a new email from an address I didn't recognize. "You're closer than you think." Attached was an address, a crumbling mansion on the edge of town, and a single warning: "Come alone." I didn't sleep that night, not because I wasn't tired, but because I knew what awaited me at that mansion would either confirm everything or destroy me completely. The mansion loomed ahead of me like a ghost from another time, its once grand facade now crumbling under the weight of decades. The address from the anonymous email had led me here, to the outskirts of New Orleans, where the city's vibrant chaos gave way to eerie silence. Spanish moss hung from gnarled trees like skeletal fingers, swaying in the humid breeze. The plantation house was a relic of old money and darker deeds, its windows shattered and its paint peeling like dead skin. I parked my car a safe distance away, the engine ticking as it cooled. My gut told me to turn back, but I couldn't, not after everything I'd uncovered. This place wasn't just another stop on my investigation. It was the heart of it all. If the coterie existed, this was where they met. And if they didn't, well, I'd still be walking into something dangerous. The front door was ajar, creaking softly in the humid breeze as if inviting me inside. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the same dust-covered foyer and peeling wallpaper I'd seen during my last visit. But now, there were signs of life, or something close to it. Candles flickered faintly in the distance, their glow casting dancing shadows on the walls. I followed the light down a narrow hallway, my footsteps muffled by a thick layer of dust. The air grew colder with every step, and that metallic scent, the one I'd noticed before, was stronger now, almost suffocating. It wasn't until I reached the hidden chamber that I realized I wasn't alone. The room was filled with coffins, at least a dozen, arranged in a semicircle around an altar draped in crimson cloth. Candles burned low on every surface, their flames flickering unnaturally despite the absence of wind. On the altar lay an assortment of artifacts: ancient books bound in cracked leather, vials of dark liquid that I didn't dare open, and a dagger with a blade so sharp it seemed to hum in the dim light. But it wasn't just the objects that held my attention, it was the documents scattered across the altar. They were written in multiple languages: French, Latin, and something I couldn't identify. But what little I could decipher chilled me to my core. The papers detailed centuries of manipulation and control by the coterie. They weren't just vampires, they were puppeteers pulling strings from behind the scenes. Politicians, business tycoons, even clergy, they had infiltrated every level of power in New Orleans and beyond. Their goal wasn't survival, it was dominance. And then there were the names, dozens of them, of people who had disappeared over the years. Some were marked with symbols next to their names, an X for those who had been killed outright, and a crescent moon for those who had been turned. My stomach churned when I saw one name near the bottom of the list: Cyrus Cade. Next to it was a crescent moon. Before I could process what that meant, I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate, like someone taking their time savoring what was about to happen. I turned around sharply, my flashlight beam landing on him. Lucien Duvalier. He looked exactly as he'd been described by those who dared speak his name, tall and elegant, with an aristocratic air that made him seem untouchable. His skin was pale but flawless, his dark eyes glittering with amusement as he regarded me like a cat sizing up its prey. "Mr. Cade," he said smoothly, his voice rich and melodic, "we've been expecting you." I tried to speak but found my throat dry as sandpaper. My hand tightened around my flashlight as though it could somehow protect me from whatever Lucien was. "You've been very thorough," he continued, gesturing toward the altar with a languid wave of his hand. "Most don't make it this far." "What do you want?" I managed to croak out. Lucien smiled, a slow, predatory smile that made my blood run cold. "Want? No, Mr. Cade. It is you who want something. Answers." He stepped closer, his movements impossibly fluid. "But answers come at a price." I backed away instinctively, but stopped when I felt cold stone against my back, the altar behind me cutting off any chance of escape. "You've seen too much," Lucien said softly, almost regretfully, "and now you must make a choice." "What choice?" I croaked weakly. Lucien crouched down beside me, his dark eyes boring into mine. "Join us or die." His words hung in the air like poison gas, suffocating and inescapable. For a moment, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the faint hum of blood rushing through my veins. Then he smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent chills down my spine, and added, "But don't worry, either way, you'll never be truly free." I didn't think, I reacted. My hand shot to my pocket for anything resembling a weapon, a penknife meant for opening packages, and held it out like it could somehow stop whatever this thing was. The figure moved so fast it blurred. One moment it was standing still, and the next it was inches from me, its breath cold against my skin. My flashlight flickered wildly as I stumbled backward into a tomb wall, heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. "Leave," it hissed in a voice that sounded like dry leaves scraping against stone. I didn't wait for it to make good on its threat. I ran like hell through twisting corridors and out into the night air that felt suffocatingly thick after what I'd just escaped. I left New Orleans behind, but it didn't leave me. The city clung to me like a shadow, its whispers echoing in my mind long after I boarded the plane back to Minneapolis. I told myself I'd escaped, that I'd survived something most people wouldn't even believe existed. But deep down, I knew better. You don't just walk away from something like the coterie, not when they've marked you. Back home, I tried to return to normal, if normal was even possible anymore. My apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in on me like they were trying to keep me contained. Every sound seemed louder. The hum of my fridge, the creak of the floorboards, even the ticking of my clock felt accusatory, as though time itself was judging me for what I'd done. I poured myself into my work, documenting everything I'd seen and learned in New Orleans. The coffins, the altar, Lucien Duvalier's chilling ultimatum, it all went into my notes. I wanted to publish the story, to expose the coterie for what they were, but I hesitated. Who would believe me? And even if someone did, what good would it do? These creatures had survived centuries by staying hidden. They wouldn't let one reporter ruin that. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. At first, it was subtle, a sense of being watched or a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. Then came the dreams. Every night, I saw Lucien's face, those piercing eyes and that predatory smile haunting me like a specter. Sometimes he spoke to me in the dreams, his voice smooth and taunting. "You can run from us, Mr. Cade, but you'll never escape." One evening, as I sat at my desk reviewing photos from the investigation, I noticed something strange. At first, it seemed like nothing, a faint blur in the corner of one image taken at the mansion, but as I zoomed in, my stomach dropped. It was Lucien. His reflection was faint but unmistakable, lingering in a cracked mirror behind me as I stood in the chamber. My hands trembled as I scrolled through more photos, images from Bourbon Street, St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, even my motel room, and there he was again and again, always just out of focus, but always there. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. He hadn't just been watching me, he'd been following me. Even now, back in Minneapolis, he was still with me, his presence lingering like smoke after a fire. I slammed my laptop shut and paced around the room, my mind racing with questions and fears. How long had he been there? Was he waiting for something? Or worse, was he already inside? That night, the dreams were worse than ever. Lucien wasn't just taunting me this time. He was standing in my apartment, his shadow stretching across the walls as he whispered promises of eternal torment. When I woke up, drenched in sweat, the room felt colder than it should have been. And then came the final blow. As I stumbled into my bathroom to splash water on my face and calm myself down, I froze. The mirror above the sink reflected everything. The flickering light bulb overhead, the cluttered counter, but not me. My reflection was gone. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light or my exhausted mind playing games with me. I leaned closer, touching the glass as if that would somehow fix it. But no matter how many times I blinked or rubbed my eyes, the mirror remained empty. The sink was there, the towel rack, the faint smudge on the glass from where I'd touched it, but no Cyrus Cade staring back at me. I stumbled backward, my legs weak beneath me. My heart pounded in my chest as the truth clawed its way to the surface of my mind, refusing to be ignored. Whatever happened in New Orleans didn't stay there. It came back with me, inside me. I started noticing other changes after that. My skin grew paler by the day, almost translucent under the harsh fluorescent lights of my bathroom. My appetite vanished entirely. Food tasted like ash in my mouth, and water did nothing to quench the dryness that seemed to spread through me like a disease. And sunlight, sunlight, began to feel like needles pricking at my flesh. Even stepping outside for a moment left me nauseous and weak. But the worst part wasn't physical, it was the hunger. A gnawing emptiness that no amount of food or drink could satisfy. It started small, just a faint craving at first, but it grew stronger with each passing day. It wasn't until one night when I caught myself staring at a stranger's neck on the subway that I realized what it was. Blood. The very thing I'd spent weeks investigating, the thing that had terrified me, was now all I could think about. I tried to fight it, tried to hold on to what little humanity I had left, but every day felt like a battle against something primal and unstoppable, a tide rising inside me that threatened to drown everything human about me. And yet, part of me wondered if this was what Lucien wanted all along. Maybe he didn't need to kill me or turn me outright. Maybe all he had to do was plant the seed and let it grow on its own. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The hunger is getting worse and the dreams are bleeding into reality. Sometimes I hear Lucien's voice even when I'm awake, whispering promises of power and immortality in my ear. Other times, I see his shadow flickering in the corner of my apartment, just out of reach but always there. So here I am, sitting in this dark apartment with my laptop open and my story half finished. My hands are shaking as I type these words because deep down, I know this isn't just an account of what happened in New Orleans. It's a confession. I've become part of the story now. And if you're reading this, if these words ever see the light of day, consider them a warning. Don't go looking for monsters unless you're prepared to find them inside yourself, because sometimes they're already there.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.